Excellent. Well, Sui, thank you once again so much for joining me and for taking time out of your day. And I think today we certainly talked briefly just before about talking about digital ID, formation of documents, but it might also be worth just having a more kind of free-flowing discussion to see where we get to as well, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, I think it needs that. The digital ID is a big topic and it's on everyone's mind, and perhaps too much. And that's maybe a direction we can take, because you can look at that mechanism and you can backward engineer it, and you can see what it is, and it's not that fancy. It's not that novel thing. It's exactly the same thing. It's just new terminology and new kind of a spin on the same problem, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it needs to be looked at with a lot more, how do you say, like a lot more objectively and analytically.
Yes.
And not just get down to the, oh my God, this is going to be, the end of everything, and we're going to be forced to do this and that, and, all the usual nonsense.
Yeah, it makes you wonder who comes up with those thoughts, doesn't it?
Yeah, and obviously you look at that technique, and it's easy to see that it's always being spun. The message is always being spun like that, because the target with that message is to create the impression that there's nothing you can do about it. So you might as well just, subscribe to this shit. That's the idea of it. And of course, that idea doesn't develop unless you have 100 people online pushing that kind of an idea and that kind of a mentality. And, especially it needs to be pushed to people who are actually looking this analytically and critically and saying that, hey, dude, this is nothing special. And then those people who are starting to get interested in, oh, okay, so, there is something we can do about this, then those people need to be tamed, and then you get these people sort of flooding the airwaves. So I'm kind of tired of that non-stop World Health Organization fear-mongering, oh my God, we have to do something discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's not even that. It's not even we need to do something. It's somebody needs to do something.
That's the problem.
right? because I have my other stuff. I have my evening news to watch or whatever.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, they want someone to save them instead of saving themselves, and a little bit of analytical thought and asking the right questions will make you realize it's not as threatening as you said. It's just a spin on the same thing.
Yeah, the analytical approach is very good approach to take, because it helps you also. It helps you sort of unravel the unknown, and the unknown is creating the anxiety. You're not sure how this works, and therefore you're not really sure how to react, and what is a good idea and what is not. But when you start piecing it, and you go to the documents and you go to the legal texts and even the forms and the entire registration process of the legal personality, when you look at it and you start seeing how it's done, then the meaning changes completely, because it becomes this process that you can describe and understand, and then you can have a dialogue about it in a totally different way, because the documents prove that you have nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the questions have to be directed to the ones who created that identity. And once you can see that it actually is like that, and the papers prove it, then isn't the whole question totally different?
Mm-hmm.
Because this entire push for these ID documents, whether they are digital or tangible, doesn't matter. The entire push is for you to take that for granted without asking where did this come from? And it's funny because a lot of the people who are looking into this, most of them have a number of different government issued IDs. And I think that's part of it. It's kind of a funny part of the process that awakens your interest into or curiosity into these questions. It's like when, if you have like driver's licenses or passports, ID cards from different countries, you can physically see that there's something funny about this. Because there are like these ID numbers and, the name and the capitalization or, the how do you actually write the name on these documents? That's different. And the issuing authority obviously is different. So a lot of the people who sort of took a deeper look into this, that has been part of their journey when they're like, okay, now, so obviously there's no one truth here. These are just documents that somebody gave to me. But why? In order to do what? In order to get what effect from me? And maybe taking one more step back, you have to ask, and I've been talking a lot about this being a question of evidence. And let's talk about that perspective slightly here right in the beginning, because when you can see that identity is a presumption, a presumption does not arise out of nothing either. So there has to be some evidence that creates the presumption before the presumption is even part of the picture or part of the narrative. And only then you are being presented with that presumption, whether you know it or not. And then your conduct and your beliefs will merge you with that presumption or express your consent to that presumption. But if you know that it's a presumption and you know how it arises from those documents that are created in reality, that are the breeder documents behind the legal identity, then you can, when you are presented with that presumption, and you know it's a presumption, then you know it can be rebutted. You can offer other evidence, and then your conduct gets new meaning. And that is extremely difficult position for the ones who are presenting a fiction to you, because you can look at the papers and the reality is not in the papers. The papers are created as they are in order to create something that doesn't exist in reality. So what it means is that, yes, the presumption legally does arise and it can be there and it can be justified. But whether you go along with it or not, that's entirely dependent on your own knowledge. So in that sense, even being and it's fine. It's fine to be pissed off about this, but on the other hand, it's not necessary. You can also approach this by just purely technical way and saying, okay, so let's see how this presumption arises. And obviously, because that's the discussion they cannot have. They can't go there, especially with people who know how it arises. And by the way, that's part of those rules. So once you know it, those rules are on your side.
Yep.
Okay, we should probably not say that there even are any sides.
Mm-hmm.
I can say it's not a side if it's a fiction.
Yep.
So instead of talking even in terms of sides, you can just focus on, well, isn't this a question of reality?
Mm-hmm.
So,
it almost reminds me of the game Cluedo, where people are stepping in and they're identifying as the candlestick or whatever, or the piece they're playing within a game that's not a real game.
yeah, and obviously these games, you look at art and you look at these games, or they are all referring to this same problem over and over and over again, although the new modern ones are getting more sloppy and more stupid, just ridiculously stupid. So there's some class in the old stories and books and ideas and those classics, but today is just pure BS.
Yes.
Which again is feedback, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like this is getting so stupid that it's unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
It's nobody cannot. People can't believe this type of nonsense for very long anymore.
No.
It's so blatantly obvious. It's like, come on. And the only thing that actually happens when you start looking into what is this, when you force yourself to take a step back and be like, okay, you have to accept that you were being pulled into that narrative, so you've been had, right? You have to accept that, because then you can say, okay, well, interesting, let's see what happened, because I don't want to get pulled into that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you get motivation into looking into this stuff. So you're like, okay, fine, and then you start seeing these tricks more and more and more, and you start identifying very, very quickly the people who push the narrative. It's like almost you speak like 5 minutes and you know if you're being dragged in some direction or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start playing games yourself, tinkering with these people.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with this? You're making a claim, I'm making a claim. Who's the arbiter here? There's a lot of humor in that at that point, because as I said last time, you get into these discussions where people say that you sign a paper in front of their eyes and they say that's not your signature.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that? Is the guy insane, or is that funny? or does it make you furious?
Mm-hmm.
If someone says like that, do you even expect for them to see it in any other way? It doesn't make any sense. The guy cannot justify that statement.
No, but if you accept it, then it's all right.
Yeah, but then he's insane.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not justifying that he's right.
Yeah.
But if you just stand your ground and go, what?
Yeah. So, and once you can see those mechanisms, how they work and how you can apply them yourselves, it's endless. You can use it so easily all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's for nothing else, you can use it to de-escalate things instead of escalating them or spinning them out of control.
That does seem to be something that the system and the enforcers of the system try and do all the time, is they coerce and they want to drag it to a high level because they seem to function well at that level. And if you just de-escalate things, it's a different game, a different relationship altogether.
Yeah, they want to get people upset because then you're not thinking clearly and analytically.
That's right.
And then your conduct can be interpreted as something that is dangerous for someone else.
Yes.
But still, it's obvious when these things start happening, when you have knowledge of these tools.
Yes.
But the journey and the details of how delicately the system is actually built is quite amazing. And the way you can do it is I've been talking about these 2 tracks. So you can just start writing the sequence of events that happen, starting from fertilization.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't like, you've listened to Kurt's stuff, and he says that he talks about like 2 timelines. So you have the reality, the biological reality, which starts from fertilization and continues onwards, and then you have the paper trail that starts from the birthday, and then that sort of continues and all these interactions with the government authorities or assumed authorities add to that narrative, that paper trail,
Mm-hmm.
as evidence, which then builds the presumption that there is a character like this.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also look at it. I like to think about it as these are just 2 separate tracks, and you can just write down all the events that happen on parallel in those both tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the tracks is the biological reality, and you can just jot it down, like what are the steps, and if you want to read about the early stages or the initial period, the 9 months, there's plenty of material. You can get into any level of detail just by Googling it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can write down what happens physically. And of course, the delivery event is just part of that. It's just one physical event that happens there, and it has no bigger meaning. Of course, yes, there are physiological changes and all that, and the parents see their offspring for the first time and all that. It has meaning in many ways, obviously. But the meaning is different from the habitual definition of birthday.
Yeah.
I don't know if people can even define what they mean by birthday, because if they would start defining it really in terms of actual happenings, they would be describing the biological event, not a legal act,
yes,
which it actually is. It's nothing more than a legal act. But then, when you put those side by side, and the paper trail starting with around the time or slightly before the birthday, perhaps, if you have some medical records there, then that paper trail, when you collect those papers and you look at that as a separate narrative, then that gives a totally different picture. The papers that are created, and they are on the record. So if you only look at the record, it's like reading a book, which gives you a totally different picture of who is this persona and what its rights are. And the definition or the picture emerging from those papers, that's the presumption. But the presumption is about the rights of that person, the rights.
Mm.
And they are defined because it arises out of those papers, and these are official papers. The problem is that it's not your rights.
No.
Because they don't describe anything inherent.
No.
They describe whatever is described in the papers.
Yeah. And they're very limited compared to your rights as well.
Yeah, and it's very delicate in terms of terminology. But of course, as we know, even the words can be exactly the same words, but they are just employed on those papers as terms of art. In order to be able to say that this proves something. Yeah, it does. It proves the rights of a fictitious person.
Yeah.
And it's fine. But tell me again, what does it have to do with me? So it's funny because it's such a powerful contrast once you start grasping it. And especially when you can see that they have no other evidence except the papers that are all signed by them, not you, not your parents. So anyone can see that if you start arguing like that, if I just invent some paperwork, I sign them, and then I just start pushing them on you and saying that this defines your rights, that's a laughable suggestion. How can you sort of assume that you have the ability to do that?
Yeah, but it is laughable, but until you look at it through that lens, from that view, most people won't even consider that.
Yeah. And that's why it's so powerful to actually look at the papers. And that's why they probably are so difficult to find, those papers.
Yeah, you spent a long time gathering your papers, didn't you?
Yeah, because they said they don't exist. It's amazing. And I had to write to them and say, look, you have an entry in the population register. Now, are you telling me that you just invented it out of thin air? Like some unknown official just opened the computer and clicked in some information. Is that how it was created? Well, then they said, well, no, of course not. Okay. So how was it created then? Well, of course you get the paperwork from the hospital and the church. Okay, so there is paperwork. So can you send me that paperwork now? It's discussions like this that they make it so concrete and so much fun, because can you see the authority and their image of themselves and their authority just crumbling away with that answer?
Yeah.
It's just okay, so we've been just talking like for 2 weeks about you not having these papers, and now just suddenly, of course, it's those papers. So there's no credibility left, and when that happens, it's kind of a similar situation as with any liar, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just exposed it.
Yeah.
And all of the reactions that then follow are exactly the same. You can read it from psychology books, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
They got caught. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, and they will take a dim view of that.
And they will start inventing stuff on the fly to just try and somehow explain why they behaved like they just did.
Yeah.
Because they are totally exposed suddenly. And this was not supposed to happen, right?
Well, how very dare you come up and ask me that question?
Well, that's one of the reactions. It doesn't change anything.
Nope.
What are you trying to do? Like reclaim your assumed authority by just stating it? What is that? There's no substance in that.
Now that reminds me of the thing the police say, by the power vested in me by blank.
Vested by whom?
Yeah. Who's that?
Yeah, you can take that question and just you could probably ask it in writing to start the correspondence, and then just follow up by saying, show me exactly the legal procedure how the vesting happened here. By whom and how is it documented? Because the only thing that it can come from is that breeder documentation behind the population register.
And possibly a quick deem thrown in there somewhere as well by someone.
Yeah. It's funny. They need the deem there as a term because at some levels they know it's not true. So you have to in order to not drive into the dead end of this being blatant deception. You need that term there.
Yep.
Because you can say that we're just deeming. we're not trying to do anything yet. We're just deeming, because the paperwork shows, kind of gives that impression.
Yeah.
So the material is full of these backdoors and plausible deniability and these little tricks that you can pull out of your sleeve and say, well, we're not actually meaning to, this was not the intention is this and that. And so you need those kinds of defenses there because it's so blatantly horrible what they're doing.
Yes.
So you have to have this endless web of excuses, and also they need a lot of them because that helps to make it more confusing.
Definitely.
So if you only have like a handful of tricks that you rely on, then it's pretty quick to debunk those or rebut. In more technical terms, you just rebut the presumption. You present evidence that shows that the presumption is impossible. And once you've done that, first question, who can do that? You're the only one who can do that.
Yep.
No one else can come and explain what your rights are. You either know them or you don't. And once you know them, you can see why you are the only one who can declare them.
Yeah.
And once you do that, it rebuts the presumption of the rights being something else. It's at its core, it's as easy as that. So if we look back to the digital ID, people should take it from the very first suggestion that needs to be subscribed to and just immediately start asking for the paperwork that creates that status. And say, so you can say like this, this is really sounds really interesting, this is really, modern and fun and sounds like, interesting, but I just want to know how this works before I can subscribe to this. So let's look at how it's all defined before I can say anything. Right? I'm just curious. Request for more information. This sounds all good, wouldn't it be horrible if it was something, intentionally bad?
What a nice approach.
We have to turn it like that because they are looking, provocation and fear mongering is the only thing they have. And they probably already know that this is, beyond repair. And isn't that kind of what, people like that, they can't laugh at themselves.
No.
And that's their downfall. Because once you see the absurdity of it, you could just turn it into a joke.
I think that lighthearted approach is a really, really cool way of doing things as well.
It helps to deal with it also.
Yes. Not just for them, but for you as well, because it puts you in that kind of playful, clear-minded, curious kind of mindset, as opposed to when you feel attacked. The mindset's different, doesn't function properly. Certainly my experience of myself.
It wears you out if you are in that combat mode all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually it gets too tough. So if you need like long-term resilience.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to just take it easy, because at the same time, once you start seeing that the evidence is on your side, and once you see what the evidence is, the weight of the evidence is so clearly on your side that basically the tactics that they have to use become just obviously obviously less convincing. The problem is that people, when you don't see it, you can't see how to argue it. And in a very interesting way, in order to argue it, you need to accept the reality. And I think it's that acceptance that is, for many people, the hard thing to do.
I'd agree with that.
So we're almost back to figuratively looking in the mirror. So whose problem is this? I'm not saying that there is any justification for people just deeming stuff and pushing things on people, because the problem to me is that it sucks the energy out of people. That they're wasting their time on stuff that doesn't matter.
Yep.
Because if you take it, have you ever done that thought experiment where if you get rid of this quote unquote system, what would happen?
Well, yeah.
Describe the world.
Well, I would see it functioning large. I mean, in terms of the mechanisms of how it could function, could remain largely similar, but with a different intent at the beginning, it would work a lot better.
So what would people be doing?
Well, if it was me, I'd be doing the things I'm really interested and feel drawn to do and I'm curious about, as opposed to doing the things I have to do just to get by sometimes.
Yeah. So do you think, eventually people would be building the kinds of buildings that nobody knows how to build anymore, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Painting the kinds of paintings that nobody knows how to paint anymore?
Yeah, developing the kind of energy systems that people have forgotten how to build. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wouldn't take long because,
It wouldn't.
No.
It wouldn't, because people are not running around like idiots, because of their mortgage and their new Mercedes.
That's right. And well, it's what do they call that status, isn't it? Which is buying stuff you don't want with money you've not got to impress people you don't like.
Yeah, and then the argument is, well, how would you'd still have to eat?
Yes.
Right. So yeah. Okay. So what are you implying there? This is a ridiculous argument. Of course, if you don't need to spend many days looking into how abundantly productive this place is in terms
huge.
of creating food.
Look at nature. For those of you that don't grow, I started growing a couple of years ago, 3 years ago nearly now, and it fascinates me how one fruit can have 50, 60, 100 seeds in it to give you 50, 60 or 100 plants from one fruit on one piece of one tree. If you're looking like tomatoes and stuff like that, they're amazing. So it's huge. Nature is abundant to an excess if you work with it, follow its patterns, and help it along.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned seeds, let me just throw in Galatians 4:7, perhaps a bit earlier. Well, let's not go in there. Just read Galatians.
Okay, will do.
Anyways, it's all there. It's the same question, right? That's how life works.
Yeah.
And isn't that proof?
Yeah, absolutely. And people also said to me, what about you need the system for law and order? I said, well, all right. I said, you probably do. I said, but look what happens on a beach when you're on a crowded beach with a load of people and someone goes swimming, a complete stranger will say to you, you keep an eye on my stuff. And you do. And they don't worry about it. You know, there's all sorts. And if some guys come along and they're making too much noise, they're a bit too rowdy, been drinking around the little ones, a group of you guys will go across and say, fellas, I know you're having a good time. Really, really appreciate what you're doing, but could you take it away from the little ones, please? And they do. You know, this whole idea we need to be controlled is out the window.
It is. And you another way to look at it is to look at these disaster areas. If there's some natural disaster, are people falling into anarchy and fighting each other there? No.
Nope. The default position
They're all
is to
helping each other.
Yep.
Because they all want, normal life back.
Yeah.
So that's a picture in your mind that has been carefully crafted by Hollywood, basically, because you watch so many disaster movies that you think that, that's what's going to happen. But somebody came up with that story. It's art.
Yes. Isn't Hollywood?
It's not reality.
Holly is the tree of the magician's wand, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what makes it difficult. People live in that world where they actually mix, and I've seen this. It's crazy. I've seen this so many times when people at a dinner table start explaining something as reality, and you can see that they are using quotes and like sort of events from movies.
Yep.
These are adults,
supposedly,
right? And they cannot make the distinction between a form of art and then they push it as a reality in real life to someone at a dinner. And you're like, dude, I saw the movie. Stop.
That's right, yeah.
This is total BS you're talking.
Yeah, leave it there while you still can.
And the danger of that, of course, is that his actions are real life actions. His conduct is derived from that form of art.
Yes.
And that real life conduct is causing problems because he's in a dream world.
Mm-hmm.
Or he wants everybody else to be.
Yeah. That's quite profound what you've just said. Because I wonder how many people are not thinking in that way and not observing what those actions are actually being interpreted as and creating.
What they need is your conduct.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And they can make it happen by implanting those images in your head. Because you think that something is going to happen. Therefore, you take that data and you use it to define your conduct going forward.
Yep.
Your actions in real life.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that the data set is bullshit.
Yeah.
You're using the wrong data.
Yep. That thing what you mentioned about the data set in our last talk is a very, very powerful thing, again, that I've been applying to a lot of things, just really as a kind of a check to say, is the data I'm looking at, is it actually accurate or not? And that's really been revealing about things that I'd assumed were accurate and in fact were skewed.
Yeah. And when the fear starts creeping in, that's when you start seeing those potential consequences, but those are not real.
No.
When instead you should be keeping those two tracks completely separate, as you do with the paperwork and your real life.
Mm-hmm.
You're walking down the street, right? That's reality.
Mm-hmm.
The potential consequences those are just images,
Hmm.
not reality. So what are you focusing on? What's the data you're basing your actions on?
Yes.
It gets very creepy when when you can start seeing people live in that total dream world.
Yeah.
How is that for a scary situation? Because basically you have like, are they predictable or unpredictable? when when
They're
someone's
actually
thinking like
both.
that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's hard. And it doesn't help when they have a programming device in every corner of every room in the house either.
It's it's difficult. And then, but should we we kind of got on a tangent, but from the identity
We can step back to that, but the
building blocks.
conversation was relevant to that. But I think building blocks would be really good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know how to do that. I've covered those quite well in those previous
Hmm.
talks, and as I guess we talked about it, but if someone doesn't find the time to dig out the papers, to ask the questions, to even Google the documents that have been cited in those previous talks, you're not going to get it. You know,
No.
if people are not willing to do the work of finding the information, actually the information works a lot better when you find it yourself.
Yes.
Because you find it for a reason. And you have to face it. It's not something that, was just dropped by someone. It's actually something that you took as your task to find, and then you did it and you found it, and then you start gradually seeing the meaning of it. It's a lot more profound like that. It's a lot better. So I don't want to sort of spoon feed this stuff too much. And there's endless. We can go into the specific terms on those reader documents, and that opens up all kinds of crazy realizations. For one of them being what actually happens in the baptism.
Yes.
That's like sort of one of the. You've read some of that stuff, I'm sure, but that's like one of the biggest. That might be one of the hardest things for people to, when they can see the document, if those documents go through the church, or if they have been created and signed by the church, then you can see it from the paper that the church gives the name to that registered person. The church is the signatory of that paper.
So it's their creation.
Yes. And I asked that specifically. I said, who's the owner of this paper and who's the signatory of this paper? And that's the paper that creates the registered entity on the population register. And the church said, we are. I wasn't even expecting them to say it, but they did.
Yeah.
And again, the paper clearly states that there is a section that the parents fill, but it clearly states in that section of the document that this is for the parents are acting as informants. So they are just informing the church about something, and the only information there, in practical terms, the only information that is filled in that section is the name. So since they are only giving that information to the church, but then the legal act, the signing of that document, filling of that form and sending it in as a registration. That's the legal act.
Yep.
That's done by the church. So where are we here? Like, how? How can you do that? So when people say that, the parents sign off some, rights, which is, one of the narratives, when people start looking into these questions, it's not like that. The parents are not signing off anything.
Nope.
So what you can then do is you can start looking at the terminology that the church uses, because if they, if the government officials use terms of art, then why would the church not use terms of art?
Mm-hmm.
So where do you get that glossary from? Well, you can find some of these. I have a couple of them. One of them is called Dictionary of the Ecumenical Movement.
Okay.
And that's like 1,500-page dictionary.
Gosh.
Of all the terms of art that the church uses.
That's a lot of terms of art.
Yeah, it's as big as Black's Law. That book.
Why?
Yeah,
I shouldn't be surprised.
It's a fascinating book. Of course, not a lot of people think it's fascinating to read, hours and hours and days dictionaries.
Well, it's a funny thing,
or
Sui.
dictionaries of ecumenical movement, but once you can see why that's important and interesting, then those books become pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because I used to read so quickly and learn speed reading at an early age, and I'm finding now that I read so slowly because I need to have books of reference to check definitions and alternative meanings as I go along. So it makes a book now, important books, certainly, they're a slow read.
Yeah, same thing. I've become very slow reader. But dictionaries are fun to read also because obviously the terms are usually alphabetically organized. So you can sort of very easily see how, because then that means that the similar words that have, for example, the same root word, they would be sort of defined close to each other, and you can sort of see the patterns there very easily. Of course, that's normal since they're built like that. But then when you think about those meanings and think about how they're being employed or what people believe they mean, there's a big discrepancy there.
Yes.
So just as an example, and I don't have the citation, maybe I can try and pull it out from there, but baptism is defined there. I don't have it here now, but what's clearly stated is that it is a ritual. Okay, it's a ritual, and ritual is not reality. Okay,
nope.
We can start with that. Everybody would probably agree. So, it's symbolic. It's a symbolic event. Okay, but at the same time, we know that it creates a legal effect. It has a legal meaning and legal effect because the church is giving a name to something. Now here's the funny thing. Since the baby is there and it's a symbolic event, is the baby a symbol of something?
Yes.
It has to be. It's a symbolic event.
Yes.
So what are we symbolizing here? Is that the thing that gets the name?
Yeah.
Because that's the real effect.
Yes.
The symbolic part is just symbolism.
Yes.
Okay. so could you be more specific on what actually is the baby symbolizing? Okay, so now we can see that obviously because they behave like that and they have this kind of a symbolic ritual that they perform, which has a real life legal effect, then there has to be something real that it symbolizes, that it's the substance of the symbolism there.
Yes.
What can that be?
Well, it would have to be more biological material, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, well, it would have to be something real.
Yep.
Okay. So what I asked them was, how can you have the right to do this? And who did you get it from? Because on this paper, you have reference to the parents as informants and references to the baptism, which is a symbolic event. And you are now making a real life legal, it's a legal act. You're registering something and you're slapping a name on it. You are slapping a name on it. So can you explain me what is it that you are in reality registering here? and because you are doing it, you must assume that you have the right to do that. That you have the authority from over something to be in a position legally to do that. You're not saying even that it's the parents. You are doing it. and then that was obviously the paper that they claim that doesn't exist. Because you don't have to spend a lot of time looking at it to realize this. Okay. And that's when it got really difficult for them to answer anything. And they basically said, we don't know.
They don't know.
We don't know. Yeah. And then I said, well, there's some information about which seems to be about some baby on it. So where did you get that information from? Because the parents are only informing you about the name. And there's obviously no clarification in what's the purpose of that information. But but you still have substance on that form which refers to a baby or a birth event. Now, how did you get that information? That's not given by the parents here. It's filled out by you guys. So where did you get it from? The answer was, we got it from the hospital. Okay. So my next question was, well, what specifically did you get from the hospital? And in what format?
Yes.
Because I might not be referring to information in the format that you're thinking. You got something from the hospital, but they were unable to define when, how, from whom, and in what format.
Unable or unwilling?
Yeah, that's the question. They said, if translated freely, they said we can't give you that information. So it's like you can't give it because you don't know, or you can't give it because somebody told you not to give it. But it doesn't make any difference. That whatever you say after that, it doesn't make any difference, because the question, the substance question here already obviously is, what did you get? Because you are clearly assuming some type of authority or ownership over that, whatever it is. And since you're filling papers and signing, giving name on it, or whatever it is, and then you organize this symbolic event where unfortunately the family thinks that something completely different is happening. But if you look at the dictionary, that's not what's happening.
No.
Legally. So
And you'd think
so
people
where are
would
we?
know, Sui, because they're being asked to identify as this created thing that no one seems to have any knowledge of.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even that is a realization. But then it's quite fascinating that when you start digging deeper, it just goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And people get more and more and more weird when you talk to them.
Go on.
I'm like, hey, come on. What did you get from the hospital? It's a pretty easy question. So what I suggested is that, well, can we just, if you cannot explain this, so this happens every day, right? So why don't we just do an audit? Let's go and observe. Let's go and observe what happens. Let's see what you get from the hospital.
How about that fell on deaf ears?
Yeah, they didn't even bother to answer that one, but at least it's clear that where we are on those terms, and then you can look at it from the other direction if the dialogue stops, which I think is, by the way, I just have to put this in here, that look, these guys are running pretty big organization, and they are saying that it's all good. They are all for the people and families and traditional whatever, or modern values, whatever it is they're pushing these days, or saying how they justify their role. And when you start asking about what do you actually do, and you start referring to their own dictionaries about what their own actions are, do you get that kind of response? How do you justify that? So is the, again, kind of similar thing happens. Like why would I give you any credit or any credibility anymore before you can answer these questions? Because the obvious problem is that there is an explanation that doesn't look good in terms of what might be happening here. So if you're doing something like that, where did you get the authority to do that? Who defined that? Are you helping anybody? Because if we look at the legal effect, you're not. And that's the actual thing that happened, right? Or can you argue otherwise? I'm all ears. Show me how that helps. Show me how that helps people.
Yeah.
I'm curious. If there is an explanation, let me hear it.
Yeah, they must love getting emails from you.
Yeah.
But they're not difficult. They're not deep questions, are they?
Did you the one reply that I got, and this is this was a very short. It's just one sentence reply that I got from the theological advisor to the Archbishop, and he replied to me in his official capacity, and he said, "Thank you for this information." That's it. So I was slightly puzzled, because did he not know this? And if he didn't, are they making any inquiries internally? Where did they get the instructions to do what they do?
Yeah, that's one to think about.
Yeah. Or did he not know, but someone else did?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. You get these little glimpses of, answers that where you can see that some light bulbs went on in people's heads.
Yeah.
I've had some similar messages, like honest messages that we tried to look into this and I just can't figure out what the heck is this.
Mm-hmm.
I truly think they tried to do that. I got a similar one from the local NIH when I sent them kind of jokingly 33 questions about their paperwork. And they could answer maybe like, I don't know, like 5 of them.
Oh.
And then they just totally ignored the rest. And these were mostly related to the terminology used in the Certificate of Live Birth, which is a document created by the local NIH. So they are the author, or they are the government entity that signs off the form. So they would have meetings there where they discuss the wording of the form, and where one of their lawyers would probably draft the text, and then they would decide that this wording is now what we're going to use. But once you can see how that wording works and what kind of a legal effect it creates, then whoever was sitting in that meeting was intentionally deciding on things that have legal effect, a specific legal effect. The people who signed off on that form didn't want to reply the question or answer the questions, but they clearly signed off on it. So did you not know what these terms mean, or because if you didn't, the entire paper is void, right?
Yep.
So if it's like that, then we're basically you have pretty big problem.
Yeah.
And if you did know, is it a bigger problem? Or?
Well, you definitely put them between a rock and a hard place just by asking the questions.
Yeah. And these are reasonable questions because there are words on that paper which are written they're not written normally, like you would have spelling that is not normal, like the born alive, which is probably one of the first terms on that Certificate of Live Birth. It says that this is to be given to all born alive infants, and the born alive is written so that there's like a space between every letter.
Really?
So that it's not normal language. It's called spellenskrift. So one of the questions was, why do you use this type of grammatical form on this paper, on this specific term? So is it referring to something that is something that is not sort of obviously obvious to the reader, or
Yep.
what's the reason for that? Those are the questions they can't answer, because it's clearly obvious from those forms and form templates that somebody decided to write those documents like that.
Yeah.
And that's enough of evidence to indicate intentional decision. Now, if you look into the terms and the meaning and the legal effect, then the intention becomes pretty big question here, because you cannot anymore say that, sorry, I didn't know it has that meaning, because you obviously wrote it in a funky way just to create some effect. So did you mean for that to apply, or did you not mean for that to apply? Are you using it for your advantage or my advantage, or what? And it's funny to ask this, like, when you can go to the bookshop and buy forensic medicine and medical jurisprudence books and dictionaries, and you find these terms there. And then when you look at take those books and those definitions, and you I can say I've been sending them like, do you use this definition? Because it's from their own books.
Yeah.
And they don't even answer those.
Yeah.
But clearly these are medical jurisprudence terms, and they have legal effect because they are medical jurisprudence terms. Come on, they are not there by accident.
No.
What else? I have the questions here in front of me. I'm just skimming through if there was some good ones. Other than those. Oh yeah, and then I obviously asked directly if because Black's Law Fifth, page 167, gives the definition of born alive, and that definition clearly states that it's it cannot be anything else except the placenta, because that's how the definition is.
So not referring to the baby then?
No. So I asked that, is this referring to the placenta or the baby? Because this definition is exactly the same as in Black's Law Fifth, and in medical jurisprudence. So, and that those words mean that it cannot refer to the baby, because baby is not a product of conception. Placenta is. And you should know it, right? But you're the doctor.
Yes.
Yeah. So why is this term here?
It's an interesting thing I've noticed with some of my interactions, that they take the definitions are critical to their side of what they want to apply on the legal side, and yet they will give very fuzzy, woolly answers back to you instead of precise answers.
Yeah, because they it's getting very clear that those terms are intentional, and that's where you start wiggling. But that's like the easiest question to ask. Imagine doing cross examination on these guys.
Oh God, that would be so funny.
Yeah. So where's the credibility in those answers if they are the same as what they try to give? And you cannot deny the fact that these terms and these forms have legal effects. And we have to answer these questions before we can conclude whether those legal effects have anything to do with me or not. Isn't that prerequisite for it? You're saying there's a presumption. Yeah, okay, presumption, because obviously your presumption arises from these papers. But what I'm giving you now is evidence that those papers can be interpreted in a different way. Did you know that? Did you know that? Did you even realize that when when these guys were filling them?
Well, chances are, at the level of the form filling, no. They're just doing their job, as we talked about in the previous episode.
Yeah. And let's take the conduct of not answering the questions. Why did you not answer the questions? Even if you didn't answer, did you do something else? Did you try to find out answers for those questions if you didn't know? Or did you just stay silent because you didn't know what to say, because you were afraid that it might indicate something that you did? I don't know. Isn't that a valid question?
They're all valid questions.
So you can take this into any direction, and it's easy to see how try to do another thought experiment and look at those papers and try to argue the other side.
Good luck.
I wouldn't even want to try that. It's such a ridiculous web of lies that how can you take yourself seriously trying to argue that?
You couldn't, but it's so critical because it's the cornerstone that holds all this nonsense together for them.
The terminology is, but the crucial effect comes from the object of that narrative, you.
Yep.
So all this terminology, all it is really, really fluffy presumption,
Mm-hmm.
which is legally valid until someone says it isn't. It's crazy.
Yeah. And you free it all up by asking questions.
I haven't seen any law books which say that somebody can just deem shit and that's how it is.
No.
It doesn't work like that. So that's a void argument from the beginning. It is nothing works like that.
But that's how the con men have to play the game out.
Yeah, it's the only trick.
Yeah.
And isn't it like that? That's why they all of the magician references, of course, because that's the only role you can assume playing that kind of a game. But once somebody knows how the trick is done, it's over. You're
That's
not
right.
a magician. You're a fraud.
Exactly, yeah. Which is what all the noise is about with the digital ID and stuff, because then you're looking at the hand he wants you to look at instead of looking behind the scenes as to what's gone on to create that illusion.
Yeah. It's a lot more interesting to look at the entire narrative, and then also the role of the church again. People I'm noticing that they're starting to overlook it or like say that it's not necessarily important or they don't have anything and the church didn't create their documents or they're not members of the church or something like that. But you can't deny the fact that these presumptions have legal effects. Now, when you look at the history of law and courts and legislation, you can see that the church is right there. So there's no denying the fact that these two questions are completely interlinked from way back. So why can't we now today talk in those same terms and say that obviously you filled the paper and your organization used to be running these courts,
Yeah.
right? So you can't just step aside from that role, or if it's not there anymore, then explain how. When you read even some of the the law books have very clear references to what the church's role was in common law or international law, all this, the development of the system. So why avoid that discussion now? Who are the guys who know about this? It's clear that it's there. So yeah, so those and of course when you trickle down. So I did the same thing with the church as I did with any other department. So I just escalated it, and so they have their own international organizations, and then of course they have the big offices in where they're publicly saying things that as you can read those. You can read like the statements and papal bulls and all these, and you can apply the same method, and they make a lot more sense when you do that. So just you don't need anything else. You just take etymology online and just crunch it, and they and they make a lot more sense. So obviously there is a very clear thread in all of this, but everybody is refusing to talk about it. That's nonsense. It doesn't go away by ignoring it, and once you can see what it is, you can see that you can't. It really doesn't go away by ignoring. That's by design. By design, like that.
You can't ignore it.
It's proof that you can't tamper with. Now, is that good or bad for them or for you?
Good for me, bad for them.
Exactly. So let's go back to what's the intention here again? What are we playing here? What is this narrative?
Is that a question for me?
It's just, yeah, I'd love to have these conversations with these people.
Yes, absolutely. You know, what's the intent behind
Join
this?
in the next episode and let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Who can we invite?
I did invite the Archbishop. No reply.
Oh, okay.
I have no problem talking about it publicly.
No, and they shouldn't either, unless they've got something to hide. Or they don't know.
Yeah, or if they know something that we are not able to see in their opinion, then explain it. Explain it.
Or the rules of their association prevent them from explaining it, and if so, why?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Why are you part of that kind of an organization?
That's right. And what great good has ever come from organizations that keep secrets?
Yeah, well, I've said it many times. I don't know if I said it last time, but it's the most ridiculous idea that you join an organization that is based on information asymmetry and you assume that you are being told the truth. So that's stupidity. No.
Many organizations spring to mind.
Yeah, because information asymmetry is like that. That's the game. And then some people, once they get a glimpse of it and they get greedy and they love it and they think they're really good at it, they get a shock of their life when they realize that somebody can see through that.
Yeah, interesting.
And of course, then once that happens, you can't really have that discussion anymore, can you?
No.
Because you can see in front of you, 200 questions that you're not ready to answer. You don't have that story for that. So and then how do you try and explain it if at every possible turn and every material and substance that your narrative is based on has double or triple meanings? Are we going to come through all of that?
One of us isn't going to come through unscathed, that's for sure.
Yes, sort of take it, look at it this way. How long do you have to come through it before everybody in the room will say, okay, dude, this is bullshit?
Definitely.
Because it's not going to change the reality. We could go on and on and on.
Yeah, that's the critical thing. The two timelines that you talked about, the reality and then the fiction. Yeah, it's such a good one from the last one. Again, something I really took on board to apply to all things, and it's fascinating to see what happens when you do that.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to almost force yourself to make that distinction because it's so much all over.
Yeah.
But I like it when there are ways to signal that difference in paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously part of the tricks they use. And these are the sort of subtle things in especially legal texts. Once you understand what the words mean or the terms mean, you can see how you can imply something from the reality in a text without making it obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fun to use those tricks back.
Yeah.
And you can start developing a skill of writing in a way that doesn't give any wiggle room. Because I'm using their terms in a very specific meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone asks, or if someone implies something from those terms, I can immediately go back and say, do you want to talk about the actual meaning I put to that term? because you're just making a wrong assumption.
Yep.
So once you and it's kind of ridiculous to do that, because you could talk about things as they are. You could talk about reality and accept it.
Yeah.
Why not? But because so many people are in that dream world, sometimes you have to sort of talk on their terms, but not by accepting their narrative.
No.
But by using their terms to point out how ridiculous the narrative is. I love it because, the conversation gets very difficult and very slow.
It does, but all the time you're also gathering evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, the evidence is the evidence, and the opportunity to do this is on any letter you receive with that name on it, because it's done by them. And you can start peeling the onion from anything they say. Literally, like anything. Or you can just, if someone happens to have an ID card or passport or something in their pocket, you can just take it and walk in and say, okay, let's talk about this. There's nothing wrong in doing that.
No.
And if you do it like that, it's going to be very hard for them to, the only thing they can try to do is to provoke you into, something that they can then justify as dangerous.
Yep. As long as you refrain from going there, you're all right.
Yeah, because these are valid questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because these create situations where people assume they affect my rights.
Mm-hmm.
But those assumptions and presumptions are built on so many layers of similar assumptions.
Yeah.
That it would be reasonable to discuss that paperwork in full detail and full transparency before you can actually conclude what the effect is.
Yes.
Of course, if you know that it has no effect, then you don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
From their side.
No.
Because it would just spread the gospel.
Not the gospel they want to spread.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost 2 hours.
Yeah, that was really, really good.
Anything else we should add?
I think we can draw a line under this one, and then have a think about the content for the next one if you're still all right for that.
Yeah. We could take something more specific next time.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see how this works. I need to figure out some. Let me just stop the recording here so we can.
Mm-hmm.